Hey everyone, it's the Haunting Hour here. Before we jump into today's video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. And if you have any thoughts on the stories in this video, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I always love hearing your feedback. Now let's get into the terrifying story. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you all have an awesome day. I've always hated thinking about that house, but I've never been able to stop. Even after all these years, I still have nights where I jolt awake with the feeling of something cold against my arm and that same awful smell in my nose. People say your memory fades over time, but the details have only grown sharper, clearer, more defined. And I think that's because I never really got closure, just a temporary escape. It started the summer I turned 10. We had just moved from a noisy apartment in the city to a rental house about 40 minutes out in the countryside. My mom said she wanted space, and my dad said he wanted quiet. What I wanted didn't matter. I was a kid. I got whatever room was available, and that was the smallest one in the house, tucked at the end of the hallway next to the attic door. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was exciting in a way. The room had one tiny window that overlooked the edge of the woods, and the wallpaper was peeling in a weird pattern that kind of looked like faces if you stared too long. I remember my dad trying to flip the mattress onto the old metal bed frame, but it didn't quite fit, so it bowed slightly in the middle. He told me it was temporary, that we'd get me a new one in a few weeks. We never did. The first few nights were uneventful. New house creaks, unfamiliar wind sounds, nothing I couldn't rationalize. But by the end of that first week, I started waking up in the middle of the night. Always around 3 a.m. I didn't have a clock back then, but I could tell by the color of the sky. Not pitch black anymore, but not close to morning either. It was that strange blue-gray time when everything feels unsettled, like the world hasn't decided if it's night or day yet. I would wake up stiff and disoriented, usually lying in the exact same position I'd fallen asleep in. At first, I thought I was just having trouble adjusting to the new bed. It sagged and creaked whenever I moved, and the springs groaned loud enough that I was afraid of waking up my parents. But then I started noticing something else, something I couldn't explain away so easily. It was the mattress itself, the way it felt. It had a texture that changed at night. During the day, it was just old and stiff, the fabric worn down to that itchy, sandpaper-like surface. But when I woke up at night, the part of the bed directly underneath me always felt damp. Not wet like sweat, but clammy, cold. It soaked through my shirt and made my skin crawl. I'd sit up and check, feeling around the edges, but the dampness never extended beyond the exact outline of where my body had been lying. I tried flipping the mattress over once when my parents were out shopping. There were stains underneath. Not the kind you'd expect. No spills or water damage. These were blackish, ringed stains that looked almost like they had bloomed from inside the foam. I remember running my fingers across one of them. It felt smooth, like something had been pressed there and absorbed completely. I flipped it back over and didn't mention it to anyone. The dreams started after that. Not nightmares, not at first. They were always the same, like watching a scene from the corner of a room I wasn't supposed to be in. A mattress lying flat on a concrete floor, fluorescent lights flickering above it, nothing else. And then slowly, the surface of the mattress would begin to bulge, just slightly, like something underneath it was stretching upward, pressing against the fabric. I'd wake up drenched in sweat and staring at my ceiling, certain I'd heard a whisper right next to my ear. By the third week, it wasn't just dreams anymore. One night I rolled over and felt something shift underneath me. It wasn't like the usual creak of springs. It was deliberate, like the mattress itself had shifted with me, as though it were trying to match my movements. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and pressed both hands down into the center of it. The fabric gave way more than it should have, sinking inward slightly, as though it were breathing. I stared down at it, not sure what I was seeing. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and I heard a low groan, deep and distant, like someone exhaling into the wall. I ran out of my room and slept on the floor outside my parents' door that night. They didn't find me until morning, and when they asked why I wasn't in bed, I told them I had a nightmare. I didn't want to say more than that. I was still trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I'd fallen asleep on a wet spot, or maybe the mattress was just old and warped. But the next night, it happened again. And this time, it didn't stop when I got out of bed. I remember lying perfectly still, afraid to move, because the air felt wrong. Heavy. The room smelled like mildew and something else, something sharper, like old meat left in a closed-up fridge. I could hear a soft squelching sound, faint but rhythmic, like something being squeezed slowly. I was about to call out for my mom when I felt the mattress shift again. Not from underneath me, but from beside me. The weight of it dipped, slowly, as though someone or something had just lain down next to me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I kept my eyes closed and listened. The bed creaked softly, and then I felt it, a cold patch of air near my face, like someone breathing just inches from me. And beneath the covers, I felt pressure. Gentle at first, almost like fingers grazing the side of my arm. Then firmer, like a hand slowly pressing down. I jerked away instinctively and rolled out of bed, hitting the floor hard enough to knock the breath out of me. The bed was empty. The sheets looked undisturbed, but that smell, rotten, warm, and metallic, was still there, lingering in the air. I left the room and didn't return until daylight. After that, I refused to sleep in that bed. I made a little nest of blankets in the hallway and tried to convince my parents to let me move into the guest room. They didn't understand why, and I couldn't bring myself to explain it fully. Every time I tried, the words sounded ridiculous. The mattress moves. Something lies next to me. It breathes. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself, but I knew what I felt. Eventually, I returned to the bed. My dad forced the issue. That night, the lights vanished, the blanket moved, and I heard a voice inside my head. Stay down. I screamed. I fought. I fled. And for the first time, my dad saw it. He touched the mattress and went silent. The next morning, he threw it out without a word. Weeks passed. We thought it was over. But 2 months later, I saw my dad return from the woods carrying something, a strip of torn mattress fabric, stained, ripped. That night, the dreams came back. But now, I was on the mattress. It moved. It breathed. It whispered. I wasn't done. I woke up screaming. My mom saw the stain on the new bed, and we left for good. Even now, years later, I still check the mattress every few weeks, because sometimes just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear it again. I remember you. I grew up in the kind of place most people drive past without noticing. It wasn't a town exactly. More like a collection of homes and trailers along a cracked stretch of road flanked by soybean fields and patches of forest. My mom worked night shifts at a nursing home, and my older brother Mason tried his best to fill in for a dad we barely remembered. Our place was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and floorboards that creaked no matter how light you stepped. I didn't mind it much when I was younger, but by the time I was 12, I'd started noticing how run down everything was. You don't realize how much kids at school judge you until they find out your water gets shut off in the winter. But the thing that really got to me, the thing that still sticks in my head years later, was the house across the field. It sat back about 200 yards behind a line of thinning trees, past the overgrown drainage ditch and the wire fence that no one had bothered to fix since before I was born. The first time I saw it, I was 7, standing on a milk crate in my bedroom to see through the high window. It looked abandoned even then. The porch was warped, windows clouded with grime, the shutters half torn. But it wasn't the way it looked that got to me. It was the way it didn't change. Seasons came and went, neighbors moved, new cars appeared in driveways, but that house stayed exactly the same, like it was sealed off from time. Mason used to make up stories about it when we were kids. He said a man had built it for his daughter, and after she died, he locked the whole place up and left it to rot. Sometimes Mason would say he saw her, the girl in the upstairs window. He'd tell me that if you stared long enough, you could see her wave. I didn't believe him. I thought he just liked scaring me, but something always pulled my eyes to that house. Even when I didn't mean to look, I found myself glancing that way. Things really started when I turned 14. That was the summer I had the dream. I still don't know how to explain it. I've never had another dream like it since. In it, I was walking across the field, barefoot, the grass warm and soft against my feet. The house didn't look ruined anymore. The windows were clear, light glowed from inside, gold and inviting. There was music playing, something slow and classical. I felt calm, like I was supposed to be there. When I reached the front door, it opened before I could knock. A girl stood there. She looked about my age, maybe a little older. She wore a pale green dress, the kind you'd see in an old movie. Her hair was braided down one shoulder and tied with a ribbon that matched her dress. She didn't smile, but her expression wasn't cold either, just expectant. She led me inside without saying anything. The interior was like something out of a magazine. Glossy wood floors, soft rugs, tall ceilings, paintings in gilded frames. There was a room with glass display cases along every wall. Inside were necklaces, bracelets, and earrings so ornate they looked like they belonged in a museum. She stood beside me while I looked at them, never speaking, never blinking, just watching. I don't remember how it ended. I woke up in my bed, sunlight in my face, heart pounding like I'd run a mile. The weirdest part came later that morning, when I mentioned the dream to Mason over cereal. His spoon stopped halfway to his mouth, and he just stared at me. "You had a dream about the house?" he asked. I nodded, and something shifted in his face. He told me carefully that he dreamed about it too. Same house, same girl, same glass room. We didn't talk about it again for a few days. I think we were both a little shaken, but we couldn't stay away from the window. Every time I passed it, I looked to see if the house had changed. On the third day after the dream, it had. It wasn't a dramatic change, just small things, like the grime on the windows was gone, and there were curtains now, drawn back just slightly. The paint on the porch rails looked newer, the weeds in the yard less wild. Something about it made my stomach drop. Mason saw it too, and we both stood there for a long time, not saying a word. That evening, we cut across the back field to the woods, like we used to when we were little. There was an old stump where we used to sit and trade Pokemon cards or roast marshmallows when we had them. We didn't really plan to walk past the house. It just sort of happened. The closer we got, the more details we noticed. Fresh footprints in the dirt path. A wind chime on the porch. A faint smell in the air, like lavender and something else, maybe smoke. And then we saw her. She stepped out from the side of the house like she'd been waiting. Same dress, same braid, same unreadable face. Her skin was pale, almost gray, but her eyes were sharp. Too sharp. She looked at us like she knew us, like we'd met before. I don't know what possessed me, but I said hello. My voice sounded too loud. Mason stood behind me, tense. She didn't say her name, just that she lived there now, that she'd been lonely, that we should come inside. Everything in my body told me to run, but I didn't. We followed her up the steps, through the front door, into the house that looked exactly like the one from the dream. Even the same music, though I never figured out where it was coming from. She led us through the living room. Polished floors, velvet furniture, fireplace burning low, and down a narrow hallway to the glass room. It was the same. Jewelry displayed like museum pieces. Spotlights above each case, shimmering off the metal and stone. She turned to me and finally smiled. "You can pick one," she said. "Only one. Then you can come back tomorrow." I felt myself nodding, my feet already moving. I stared into the cases, hypnotized by the colors, the tiny details. I don't know how long I was in there. It felt like hours or maybe seconds. But the spell broke when I heard Mason yell my name. It was sharp and real, cut through the stillness like a knife. I spun around, but the door was gone. In its place was a wall, old and peeling, covered in cobwebs. The lights had changed too. They flickered, buzzing faintly. The glass cases were dusty, and most were cracked. The jewelry inside had tarnished, some of it crumbling. The air smelled like rot. I panicked. I ran to the spot where the door had been and slammed my hands against it. Wood splintered beneath my fingers, and I tore at it until it gave way. I stumbled out into the hallway, but it wasn't the same anymore. The lights were dim and uneven. The floor creaked beneath my steps like it might cave in. The paintings on the walls had been slashed. The girl was gone. I called Mason's name, my voice breaking, and started toward the living room. That's when I saw the bodies. 2 people, what was left of them, sat slumped on the couch. Their skin was leathery, clinging to bone. One still held a newspaper that had turned brown with age. Their mouths were open, like they died mid-sentence. A swarm of flies buzzed around their heads. I backed away, nearly slipping. I turned toward the staircase and froze. At the top stood Mason. His shirt was soaked in blood. His eyes were wide and unfocused, and he tried to speak, but only a choking noise came out. He lifted a hand to his neck, and I saw it. His throat was open, sliced deep. Blood ran down in thick streams. Behind him, she appeared. Not the girl I'd seen before. Not exactly. She was taller now. Her eyes were wrong, completely black, no whites. Her smile stretched too far. Her dress was soaked at the bottom, as if she'd waded through something foul. She stepped forward and Mason collapsed, tumbling down the stairs. I don't remember screaming, but I know I did. I turned and ran, slipping through the ruined hallway, tripping over debris and torn carpet. The front door loomed ahead, still cracked open. I burst through it and fell into the grass. I didn't look back. I ran the whole way home, my lungs burning, my vision blurred. When I reached our trailer, I flung the door open and fell inside. The lights were on. The TV buzzed softly. Everything was normal, but it wasn't. The smell hit me first. Mold and ash and something metallic. I looked up and saw the living room, destroyed. The furniture was covered in dust and black mold. The floor was streaked with something dark. In the center of the room lay Mason, not breathing. I screamed his name, but no sound came out. I tried to run to him, but something grabbed me from behind. I turned and saw her. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyes bore into mine as her hands clamped around my shoulders. I felt cold rush through me, like ice in my veins. She opened her mouth, and I saw teeth, too many of them, long, needle-thin, and gleaming wet. Then everything went black. I woke up the next morning in my bed, clean sheets, sunshine through the window. The field outside was empty. The house was gone. Not old, not new, gone. The grass where it had stood was flat and discolored, like something heavy had sat there too long. When I ran to tell my mom what had happened, she looked at me with confusion. She said there was never a house there, that there hadn't been anything past the fence for decades. I told her about Mason, about what I saw, about the girl. She said Mason had gone missing that night, that I was found asleep on the porch, curled up and shivering, with dirt on my hands and a cut on my forehead. No one believed me. They said I was in shock, that I'd imagined it, but I didn't. I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and sometimes late at night I dream of the house again. Only now I'm not on the outside looking in. I'm standing in the glass room, waiting. I want to be clear before I start. What I'm about to tell you is not a story. At least not the kind you hear around a campfire or on some YouTube horror channel. This happened to me. I lived it. I remember every second of it in a way I wish I didn't. I've tried not to. I've tried pushing it away, telling myself it was a sleep disorder, a dream, maybe even a mental break. But every time I close my eyes at night, I remember how real it felt. And deep down, I know it was. It happened during a stretch of nights when I was dealing with insomnia. I'd gone through bouts of it before, but this was different. I wasn't just struggling to sleep. I was dreading it. I'd lie there for hours, exhausted, but wide awake, with my thoughts pinballing off each other. I'd stare up at the ceiling in the dark and count the faint bumps in the plaster. I'd go over conversations I had that day, and then replay them in my head in every possible way I could have said something better. Normal late-night stuff, I guess. But this time, there was something else too. Something behind it all, like a low hum you only notice once you really start listening. It started on a Sunday. I remember that specifically because I had work the next morning and I was already running on fumes. I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of town where the streetlights only half work and the neighbors either sleep during the day or don't seem to exist. It's the kind of place that's quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful, just vacant. I'd gotten into bed around 10 p.m., hoping to force myself into some kind of rest. Even if I didn't fall asleep right away, I tossed and turned for what felt like an hour. I remember looking at my phone and seeing the time, 11 p.m. I shut it off, rolled to my side, and pulled the blanket up under my chin. The room was quiet, still, too still. No traffic sounds, no hum from the refrigerator, no wind outside. Just this weird, pressing silence. It wasn't comforting. It was like the room itself was waiting for something. That's when I heard it. A soft creak, like someone had stepped onto the floorboards in the hallway outside my bedroom. It wasn't loud, but it was specific. Too clean to be the house settling. I stopped breathing and just listened. My heart started thudding so hard it felt like I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, heightened by sleep deprivation. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about how it had sounded like weight, like pressure on wood. I stayed still, eyes open, staring at the far wall in the dark. The sound didn't come again. I finally turned onto my back and pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to sink into that soft cocoon of warmth. I told myself I was being ridiculous. No one was in my apartment. The doors were locked. I had a motion light in the hallway that hadn't gone off. There was nothing there. Nothing but me and the dark and my stupid, overactive brain. But then, over the next few nights, it got worse. The creaking came back at different times, sometimes around midnight, sometimes closer to 3 a.m. Always just once, always just far enough away to make me question it. I'd wake up already feeling like I wasn't alone, like I'd been pulled from sleep by something standing just out of reach. But every time I got up and checked the hallway, it was empty. Still. Silent. One night, I thought I heard breathing. Not mine. I was holding mine at the time. But something low and rhythmic, coming from near the foot of the bed. It only lasted a second, maybe two. I yanked the covers up and waited, frozen, eyes burning from being opened so wide in the dark. I wanted to turn on the lamp, but I was too afraid of what I might see if I did. That was the worst part, not knowing what was there, just knowing something might be. After that, I started sleeping with the blankets pulled over my head. I hadn't done that since I was a kid. Back then, it felt like a shield, a simple little barrier that nothing could get through. I told myself it was just to block out light or help me relax. But I knew why I was doing it. I felt watched, and I thought, if I couldn't see it, maybe it couldn't see me. That's the kind of logic you reach for when you're desperate. It was on the 6th night that everything snapped. I remember it was exactly 3 a.m. because I had woken up and checked my phone, then placed it face down on the nightstand. The second I turned away from the glow of the screen, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like it was thicker somehow. I heard a slow creak from the hallway, closer this time. And then, a shuffle. Something dragging lightly across the carpet. I buried myself under the blanket so fast I nearly pulled it off the mattress. I curled up tight, hands clenched around the fabric, my face hot and damp beneath it. The air under there was stifling, but it felt safer than whatever was outside. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a noise, just a building, just my own fear eating me alive. But then I heard something new. There was a whisper, a low, dragging voice that sounded like it came from inside the room. Not loud, but close, like someone kneeling beside the bed, lips just inches from the covers. It said something I didn't catch at first. My ears were ringing from adrenaline. I strained to hear every hair on my arms raised, and then I heard it again. Clear this time, just 3 words. There you are. My body went stiff. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I felt like something had pressed down on the blanket, just slightly, enough to let me know it was real. Something was on the other side of the fabric, and it had been looking for me. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe a minute, maybe an hour. I kept waiting for something to grab me, to pull the blanket down, to breathe against my skin, but nothing happened. Eventually, I passed out. I think my brain just gave up trying to cope and shut down. When I woke up, it was morning. The light coming through the blinds was bright and warm and normal. The hallway was empty. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The blanket was still over my head, and I remember peeling it back slowly, half expecting to see someone crouched at the side of the bed. But there was no one. I thought maybe it had all been a dream. But later that day, I noticed something. 3 faint impressions at the edge of the mattress, like finger marks, not deep but visible. And they weren't mine. I hadn't moved all night. I would have remembered touching that spot. I haven't slept well since. That was months ago. I moved apartments not long after, thinking a change of scenery might help. But some nights, I still feel it. That weight in the air. That stillness before something shifts. I haven't heard the voice again, not directly. But once, around 2 a.m., I heard a creak from the hallway in my new place. Just one. Just enough. I don't pull the blanket over my head anymore. I leave the lights on. But I still lie there most nights, waiting, listening, because I know it's still looking, and eventually, it'll say it again. There you are. I've never liked taking the bus at night. There's something about the silence, the flickering lights overhead, and the way the windows reflect more of the inside than what's actually outside that always made me uneasy. I'm not talking about the usual public transit weirdness. No loud passengers or missed stops or sketchy characters. I'm talking about that heavy kind of quiet that settles in late at night when there's no one left but you and maybe the driver, and even he seems like a ghost. For the record, I don't scare easy. I've walked home in freezing rain when the buses weren't running. I've waited out delays on cracked benches under broken lights without flinching. But what happened that night, it stayed with me in a way I don't know how to explain. It didn't just scare me. It altered something in me. Like a thread was pulled loose in my head and never quite got put back in place. This was about 2 years ago. I was working late shifts at a data center across town, doing server maintenance. It wasn't a bad gig, but it meant getting off at weird hours, usually around 10 or 11 p.m. I'd catch the last bus that ran out toward the edge of the city and transfer once before walking the final few blocks to my place. It was routine, something I'd done hundreds of times. Same route, same stops, same empty streets. That particular night was a Thursday. I remember because I always treated myself to fast food on Thursdays, and I had a greasy paper bag full of fries on my lap as I sat in my usual seat, about halfway down the aisle. There were maybe 3 other people on the bus at first. A woman in scrubs near the front, a guy in a ball cap staring out the window, and an older man who got off 2 stops after I boarded. After that, it was just me and the guy with the hat, until he got off somewhere near the river. I was alone for several minutes, the bus rumbling through mostly empty intersections. I wasn't paying much attention. I had earbuds in, half listening to a podcast while chewing on cold fries. I remember the streetlights outside started getting sparse, replaced by those dim orange sodium lamps that barely light up the sidewalks. We passed an old overpass, and I glanced up just in time to see our reflection in the dark glass above me. And that's when I noticed I wasn't alone. There were two kids sitting in the very back row. I hadn't seen them get on. No sound, no footsteps, no door chime. They were just there, sitting side by side, feet not quite reaching the floor, talking softly to each other. Their voices were faint but sharp enough to cut through the sound in my ears. I pulled one earbud out, curious. At first, I thought they were talking about a movie or maybe some school rumor, but the longer I listened, the more my stomach tightened. "You're not supposed to turn around," one of the boys said. His voice was small but serious. "If you do, that's when it grabs you." "How does it know when you're about to look?" the other asked. "It watches your reflection. If it sees your eyes start to move, it knows." The other boy was quiet for a second, then asked, "What does it do to you?" "Takes you," the first said. "Makes you part of it. You don't get off the bus after that." I sat frozen, hands still holding a limp fry. It wasn't just the words that got to me. It was the tone. These weren't kids trying to scare each other. They weren't laughing or exaggerating. They sounded like they were going over something they'd memorized, something they believed. I turned slightly in my seat to glance at the back row through the reflection in the window. I could see them, barely. They were shadowy outlines, but I could tell they were still talking. Only I couldn't hear them anymore. Their mouths moved, but the sound was gone, like someone had muted the bus. I pulled out my other earbud. Nothing. Just the rumble of the engine and the hiss of the doors sealing as we passed another empty stop. I didn't look back. Not directly. I told myself they were just kids, maybe coming back from a movie, repeating some urban legend. But something about the whole thing didn't add up. I hadn't seen them when I got on, and I hadn't heard them once until just a minute ago. I kept glancing at the reflection in the window, trying to get a better look without turning my head. It was like a game, or a trap. Then the bus slowed. It was my stop. I stood up, still watching the glass, and noticed something that made my skin crawl. The kids weren't reflected the same way everything else was. Their forms didn't match the shadows on the seats. It was like they weren't part of the environment, just overlays. Impressions burned into the window that didn't quite belong. The driver didn't say a word as I stepped off. The doors shut behind me, and I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the bus as it pulled away. I expected to see the kids watching me from the back window, but the seats were empty. Completely empty. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept replaying their words in my head. "You don't get off the bus after that." What did that mean? Were they talking about someone they knew? Something they read? Or was it worse than that? I tried to brush it off over the next few days. I told myself it had to be a prank or a dream or something weird I misheard. But the next week, on another late shift, I took the same bus again. I didn't want to, but it was the only one that ran that late. Same driver, same empty seats, same eerie quiet. And again, 2 stops after I got on, the kids were back. Same clothes, same seats, same quiet voices just barely reaching my ears. This time, I didn't listen. I kept both earbuds in, stared straight ahead, and pretended I didn't hear them. But I felt them, felt their words sliding down the aisle toward me like invisible fingers. I knew if I turned around, if I even peeked over my shoulder, something would change. The following night, I drove. Borrowed a friend's car and paid way too much for gas just to avoid getting on that bus again. But the week after, I didn't have a choice. I had no ride, no money for an Uber. I was tired and frustrated and convinced I was letting my imagination get the better of me. So I took the bus, one last time. There were no other passengers when I boarded, and I immediately regretted it. The moment the doors shut, the air in the bus felt off, thicker, like something unspoken had been sealed in with me. I chose a different seat, closer to the front, trying to convince myself I was imagining everything. But then I heard them again, talking softly, just behind me. I didn't want to listen. I really didn't. But something about the way they spoke pulled at me. I could just barely make out the words. "He doesn't know," one of them said. "He thinks he still has a choice." The other boy replied, "He already looked once. It remembers." My heart slammed in my chest. My hands were shaking. I gripped the metal pole beside my seat and stared at the front windshield, at the reflection in the glass. I could see them again. This time, they weren't looking at each other. They were both staring at me. I stood up, slowly. The bus had just started to slow down for my stop. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to get off. I moved toward the door, eyes forward, heartbeat echoing in my head. The door hissed open. I stepped down, never once turning back, never once looking at the windows. But just before the doors closed behind me, I heard one of them whisper, "Too late." I turned around. I didn't mean to. It was a reflex, like hearing someone say your name in a crowd. I just turned. The bus was already pulling away, headlights vanishing down the street. But I saw the back window, and in it I saw something that wasn't a child. It had no face, no features, just the suggestion of a person sitting still, watching. Its outline shimmered faintly like heat rising off pavement, and next to it the two boys were gone. Since then I haven't taken the bus. Not once. I walk even when it rains. I keep lights on at night, check mirrors twice, avoid reflections when I can. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear something. Faint voices outside my window. A whisper that seems too close to be coming from the street. And every so often, when I glance at the far corner of a room, I catch the shape of a seat, the outline of a window, and something just barely visible, watching me from behind the glass. They said you don't get off the bus after that. I think I did, but I don't think it agrees. It's been almost 20 years since that summer, but I still think about it more than I care to admit. Most of the time, the memories sit in the back of my mind, like something in a dusty box that you don't want to open. But every now and then, a certain smell, like wet hay or old wood, or the sound of a rusty gate swinging in the wind brings it all rushing back so clearly it's like I'm standing there again, 13 years old. Heart pounding, knees scraped, and screaming for help. I haven't told many people the full story. I think part of me still hoped it wasn't real. But I'm not a kid anymore. And if anyone out there ever sees what I saw, I want them to know they're not crazy. That summer started like all the others. My parents sent me off to stay with my aunt and uncle for 3 weeks while they worked. They lived out in rural Michigan, right at the edge of an old logging town that wasn't really a town anymore. A couple gas stations, a small grocery store, and a long stretch of fields broken up by patches of pine and oak forest. I actually looked forward to it. It meant freedom. My cousin Garrett was only a year older than me and way more daring. We'd ride bikes through the trails, fish in muddy creeks, and stay up late trying to scare each other with ghost stories we found online. It was the kind of place where parents didn't worry too much if you were gone all day, as long as you made it back by dinner. On the day everything happened, we'd set out early. Garrett wanted to see if we could find the old railroad that supposedly ran behind the hills on the north side of Harrow Creek. There wasn't a real plan. We packed sandwiches and a couple water bottles, told his mom we'd be back before dark, and started walking. By early afternoon, we were miles from anything familiar. The forest grew denser, and the fields stopped looking like someone's property. I remember the air getting thicker too, like the humidity had nowhere to go. Garrett wasn't worried though. He loved pushing further than we were supposed to. He said that's where the real stuff was, the weird stuff. We found the house just before 4 p.m., though at the time we had no idea what time it was. There was no cell signal out there, and we didn't bring a watch. It was Garrett who saw it first. just past a crumbled stone wall hidden by tall grass. "Check that out," he said, and we pushed through the brush until it came into view. A two-story farmhouse, gray with age, boards warped, and windows fogged over with grime. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and most of the front porch had collapsed into the dirt. There was a rusted windmill creaking in the breeze nearby, its blades bent and missing chunks. The whole place looked like it had been deserted for decades, but something about it felt off. It wasn't just abandoned, it felt ignored, like people had gone out of their way to pretend it didn't exist. Garrett was already halfway to the porch before I caught up. He was always first to do things, especially if they were dumb or dangerous. I remember calling after him, telling him maybe we shouldn't mess with it, but he waved me off and said it'd be quick, just a look, 5 minutes. I didn't want to wait outside alone, so I followed him. The yard was overgrown with weeds as high as my waist. The air smelled strange, like mildew, dry corn, and something else. Sweet but sour. Not strong, but enough to make you wrinkle your nose. The front door was open. Not wide open, but cracked enough to see the darkness beyond it. Garrett pushed it gently, and it groaned on the hinges. Inside was worse than I expected. Dust and cobwebs covered everything. There were old furniture pieces, some tipped over, some still upright. Papers were strewn across the floor, and the wallpaper peeled in long strips. I stepped in after Garrett and immediately regretted it. The air was heavy, wet with decay. Each step we took stirred up a smell that made my eyes water. It was like stepping into a room that had been sealed with something rotting inside. We walked through the main room slowly. There were old shoes under a cracked coffee table. A broken mirror on the wall reflected a warped version of the hallway behind us. I called out a weak, "Hello?" not expecting an answer. There wasn't one, of course. But I didn't like the way my voice sounded in there. It didn't echo right. It felt like the air swallowed it whole. Garrett kept moving, more curious than ever. He found a door at the back that led to a bedroom. That's where it all changed. The smell hit me harder the second we crossed the threshold. I stopped in my tracks while Garrett walked in. The bed was sunken in, the mattress barely more than a lump of fabric and mold. There were boxes stacked against the far wall, and beside them, there was a shape on the floor. I remember thinking it was just old clothes at first, a heap of gray and brown and red. But then Garrett stepped closer and said something I didn't fully register. I followed his gaze and saw it. An old man, or what was left of him, lying on his back, arms folded, eyes wide open and glazed like frosted glass. His face was sunken, and his mouth hung open in a way that made my stomach turn. There were flies. Not many, but just enough. He looked like he'd been there for months, maybe longer. I screamed. I didn't mean to, it just happened. Garrett grabbed my arm, his face pale, and we both bolted out of the room. The door hit the wall so hard it cracked. We ran through the house toward the front door, stepping over scattered furniture and debris. My legs felt like jelly, but I was moving fast. I didn't want to breathe. I just wanted out. We were almost outside, past the porch steps, when we heard a door slam behind us. Not the front door, the shed. We hadn't even noticed it before. It was small and hidden behind a patch of bushes, a few yards from the house. The door burst open and someone stepped out. Not someone. A woman. Old. Thin. Her gray hair hung in tangled ropes, and her face was splotched with something dark. Mud or grease or worse. Her eyes were wild. She was holding a knife. It wasn't a kitchen knife. It was something else. Shorter. Serrated. The blade looked dirty. She said something I couldn't understand. It didn't sound like English. It didn't even sound like language. Just noise. A dry, scraping moan that rose from her throat like air escaping a cracked pipe. She moved toward us, fast and clumsy. I don't remember thinking, just running. Garrett was right behind me as we sprinted through the yard, tearing through the weeds and leaping the stone wall. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if she was following. I just ran. It wasn't until we were halfway through the woods that I realized something was wrong. Garrett wasn't behind me anymore. I stopped, gasping for air, and turned around. Nothing. No footsteps. No rustling brush, just the sound of wind and my own heartbeat. I shouted his name, again and again. I spun in every direction, trying to see through the thick trees, but he was gone. Panic took over. I ran blindly, not even sure I was heading the right way. The trees seemed to twist and lean in around me. I must have tripped a dozen times, scraped my arms and legs on branches and roots. I thought I was lost for sure. But then I saw it, the edge of the woods, the clearing near the road, and beyond that, the dirt driveway leading to my aunt and uncle's house. I burst through the door screaming. My aunt dropped a plate in the kitchen. My uncle stood up so fast he knocked over a chair. I don't remember what I said exactly. Something about a dead man, a woman with a knife, Garrett missing. I think I was crying. I'm pretty sure I threw up on the floor. My uncle grabbed his truck keys and told me to get in. We drove back to where I thought the house was, but it wasn't easy. I was disoriented and everything looked different in the evening light. We finally found it about 30 minutes later. But the house, it wasn't the same. It looked older, more collapsed. The door was gone, the windows were broken, the yard was silent. We checked the inside. No body, no woman, no blood. Just empty rooms filled with dust and mold. We checked the shed, empty too. Garrett was nowhere. The police were called. They searched for days. Dogs, volunteers, helicopters, nothing. No signs, no clues, no footprints but our own. No one believed my story, not fully. They thought I was traumatized, confused, maybe covering something up. But they never found anything. The official explanation was that Garrett ran off, got lost in the woods, maybe drowned. But I knew. I know. Something was wrong with that house. Something had been waiting. I think we were supposed to find it. Or maybe Garrett was. I still don't understand why it took him and not me. I've wondered for years if he's still alive somewhere, or if what's left of him is trapped in that place, in a version of the house no one else can see. I haven't gone back to that part of Michigan. I never will. Every once in a while, I look up unsolved cases. I've seen posts about missing hikers, vanishing pets, strange lights in the woods near Harrow Creek. But nothing ever sticks. It's like the land forgets, or pretends to. But I remember. I remember everything. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the wind rattles the window panes, I swear I can hear it. That creaking windmill spinning in a place that should no longer exist. I've been a cab driver for over 12 years now, mostly night shifts. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and more importantly, it lets me avoid crowds. I don't like noise or big conversations. Most nights, I keep the radio low, drive in silence, and wait for the rare fare that doesn't smell like beer or scream into their phone. It's a strange life, but not a dangerous one. At least, it never felt that way. Until the night I picked up those girls. This happened about 5 years ago, give or take. I was working a Tuesday night shift that had been dragging for hours. It was cold and drizzling, the kind of night where your windshield fogs up, no matter how high you set the defrost. The dispatcher hadn't sent me anything in nearly an hour, so I started cruising the edge of town where the old train tracks run through the industrial district. There's a stretch of road there that borders an old riverbed. No houses, just lots filled with abandoned shipping containers and scrap metal yards. Most of the city avoids it after dark, but I've picked up plenty of people there. Shift workers, club kids walking home, lost tourists. Around 12 a.m., I saw them. 3 girls standing on the shoulder just outside the reach of the nearest streetlight. They weren't waving or yelling, but as soon as I spotted them, I slowed. Something about the way they stood there, still, side by side, perfectly spaced, just didn't feel right. But I'd been bored for too long, and honestly, I figured it was an easy ride. I pulled up and lowered the window slightly. They looked like college students. early 20s maybe, dressed casually. One of them had her arms wrapped around her middle like she was in pain. The other two just stood beside her, one on each side, not touching her, just watching. I asked where they were going, and one of them said the hospital. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. She didn't sound scared though, just tired. I unlocked the doors. They got in without saying much. The one in the middle groaned as she lowered herself onto the seat. I glanced at her in the mirror. She was pale, like the kind of pale you only see in people who've been sick for a long time. Her forehead was damp, and her breathing was shallow. The girl to her right looked at me through the mirror and said they didn't have a phone to call an ambulance. They'd been walking for over an hour, trying to get help. That should have struck me as strange. There were no houses nearby, no clubs, no campus buildings, nothing. Just miles of empty space. Still, I didn't ask questions. I pulled out fast, cutting back toward the main road. The nearest hospital was only about 10 minutes away, and I figured I'd get them there faster than any EMT would. The girls didn't say anything else. The one in pain just moaned quietly now and then. Her hands were shaking. The other two just stared out the windows. I remember feeling an odd pressure in the car, like the air was too heavy. I kept glancing in the mirror, but it was hard to focus. Their eyes never met mine. We pulled up to the emergency entrance a few minutes later. The lights outside the hospital were blinding after all that darkness, but I was relieved. I threw it in park and turned to tell the girls to stay put while I went in to get help. They didn't respond. They just stared ahead, the two on the sides holding their posture like statues. The girl in the middle had gone quiet. Too quiet. I started to feel a gnawing panic in my chest. I told them again I was going inside. Still, no response. So I ran through the sliding doors and called out to the nurse at the front desk. I didn't bother with details. I just said there was a sick woman in my car and she needed help immediately. The nurse followed me outside without hesitation. She didn't even grab a wheelchair, just walked quickly behind me as I jogged back to the cab. I remember the sound of her footsteps suddenly stopping as we rounded the back of the vehicle. I turned and saw her frozen there, eyes wide, one hand over her mouth. I asked what was wrong. She didn't answer. She stepped forward slowly, then turned to me and asked what I'd done. I blinked at her, completely confused. I told her I'd picked up 3 girls on the side of the road and brought them straight here. She stared at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "They're dead, all 3 of them." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I thought she was joking. I told her they were sick, yes, but not dead. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Come see for yourself." I followed her as she walked to the back passenger door and opened it. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the scent of sweat or sickness. It was worse, sweet and sharp like burned meat and old chemicals. I looked inside. The girl in the middle was slumped forward now, head on her knees. Her skin had a grayish tint, and the sweat on her forehead had dried into a strange residue. The other two hadn't moved at all. Their eyes were glassy, and there was something else. Their clothes, they looked raw, melted almost, as if they'd been fused to their bodies. The nurse backed away, already on her radio. She kept saying something about security, about calling the police. I stood there in a daze, staring at the 3 girls I was so sure had been alive minutes earlier. I couldn't make sense of it. They hadn't been like this when they got in. I knew that. I started trying to explain, but no one would listen. The security guard came out and told me to wait inside. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They questioned me in a small room near the ER. I told them everything I could, how they flagged me down, how one was sick, how I drove them straight there. The officers didn't say much, just took notes and exchanged glances with each other. It was around 2 a.m. when one of them finally came back into the room and asked if I'd heard about the crash. I told him no. He said 3 young women had died in an accident earlier that evening, around 8 p.m. They were trapped in a burning car near the old rail corridor. I went cold. I asked where exactly. He told me the intersection of Riverbend and Hargrove. That was the exact spot I picked them up. I told him that wasn't possible. I told him they were alive when I saw them. He didn't say I was lying, but I could see the skepticism in his face. Then he showed me something on his phone, a photo of the 3 girls. I recognized them instantly. Same hair, same faces, same expressions. It was them, no doubt in my mind. The officer said they were taken to this same hospital right after the crash. All 3 were pronounced dead on arrival. The bodies had been in the morgue for nearly 4 hours before I supposedly picked them up. After that, it all moved quickly. My cab was impounded. I was taken in for further questioning. They tested me for drugs, asked if I'd been drinking, tried to get me to admit I was playing some kind of twisted joke. But I wasn't. I kept telling them over and over. They got in, they talked to me, they asked to be taken to the hospital. But no one believed me. Not really. The official report listed the cause of death as prior trauma from collision and fire exposure. They let me go, eventually, but my taxi license was suspended pending a review. I didn't bother renewing it. I haven't driven a cab since. There was one more thing that really cemented it for me. Something I didn't tell the police because I knew how crazy it would sound. It happened a few days later, after I got my car back from the lot. I was cleaning it out, trying to decide if I should sell it, when I opened the back door and saw something wedged into the seat pocket. It was a bracelet. Cheap plastic beads, pink and blue, with a cracked heart charm dangling from the center. I didn't recognize it, but I knew it hadn't been there before. It was melted slightly at one end, like it had been near heat. I left it on the dashboard and walked away. I haven't touched it since. It's still there. I keep the car locked in the garage now. Sometimes, late at night, I go down just to look at it. Just to remind myself that it all really happened, that I wasn't dreaming or hallucinating. 3 girls got into my cab that night, and they were already dead. Some people think spirits linger near the place where they died, that they wander, looking for help or closure, or maybe just recognition. I don't know if that's true. I only know that something broke the rules that night. Something crossed a line it wasn't supposed to, and I was the one who ended up caught in the middle. I still drive sometimes, just to clear my head, but never after dark, never near the rail corridor. And if I ever see anyone standing on the side of the road past midnight, I don't stop. I don't even slow down. I just keep driving, because I learned the hard way. Some fares aren't meant to be picked up. There's a reason I don't make plans late at night anymore. I'm not talking about being tired or losing track of time. I mean real plans, spoken aloud, set in stone. When I was younger, I never thought about it. You grow up hearing little warnings from older folks. Things like, don't speak your intentions under moonlight, or whisper your plans indoors, or something else might listen. We always laughed it off. Thought it was just the usual superstitious noise people like to pass down. But I know better now, because I saw what can happen when something that shouldn't hear you does. And I don't care what anyone thinks. I know what I saw. I know what hurt us. This happened when I was 19, back when I was still living with my dad in a small mountain town near the edge of a forest preserve. It wasn't the kind of place you find on a map unless you're looking hard. A couple hundred people at most, everyone knew everyone else, and you could walk from one end of town to the other in under 10 minutes. My girlfriend at the time, Leah, lived 3 blocks over. She worked early shifts at the diner and usually went to bed before 10, but on this particular night, she wanted to walk. It was one of those warm autumn evenings, the kind that trick you into thinking winter's still far off. The leaves had just started to fall, and the sky was clear. With a full moon hanging low and fat, I remember the color of it, Not white or yellow, just faintly red like rusted metal. I should have taken that as a sign. We met up by the old post office, where the trail behind town opened up into the foothills. There was a dirt path there we liked to walk, one that looped around a small pond and back through the tree line. No one really used it after dark. There weren't any lights, and it ran past a collapsed barn no one had touched in decades. It always gave me the creeps when I was a kid, but with Leah next to me, I didn't think much of it. We walked slowly, talking about nothing. She was wearing this old denim jacket she loved, the one with the faded patches sewn along the sleeves. I remember that detail so vividly, probably because I never saw it again after that night. As we walked, we started talking about the next morning. We were planning to hike out to one of the older lake docks before sunrise. There was this little stretch of shore barely anyone used anymore, and Leah thought it would be romantic to watch the sunrise from there. I told her we'd need to be out the door by 5 if we wanted to catch it. She smiled and said she'd meet me at my porch, like always. She told me not to be late. I said I wouldn't. We made the plan out loud, right there under the trees, with nothing but the moon above us. And that's when the air shifted. Just slightly. I felt it like a breath brushing the back of my neck, and I saw Leah pause, just for a second, like she felt it too. But neither of us said anything. We were just kids, invincible, untouchable. We walked back hand in hand. She kissed me goodnight at the gate to my yard, then turned and walked off down the road. I stayed outside for a while longer, watching the moon, letting the silence settle in. Then I went inside and set my alarm for 4:45 a.m. I slept light, restless, but not disturbed, at least not at first. It was the sound of my name being called that pulled me up. Not loud, not urgent, just casual, like someone calling from across the street. "Hey, you ready?" the voice said. I blinked a few times, sat up, and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. The clock on my nightstand said 4:50 a.m., a little late, but not much. I got dressed quickly and went to the window. She was there, standing at the edge of my yard, arms at her sides, looking up at my room. The moon was still out, the sky just barely starting to lighten in the east. Leah looked like she always did. Same jacket, same dark hair falling past her shoulders. But there was something off about how she stood, too straight, too still. I waved and called down, saying I'd be right there. She didn't wave back, just turned and started walking down the road. I rushed down the stairs, grabbed my pack and coat, and slipped out the door. I called out again, but she didn't stop or turn around, just kept walking slowly, with this steady, deliberate pace. I thought maybe she was just trying to be funny, playing a little game. I started jogging to catch up. When I sped up, so did she. Not quite running, just fast enough to keep the distance between us the same. It felt like we were stuck in some loop. Whenever I slowed down, so did she. When I stopped and called out again, she paused too. Always just far enough that I couldn't see her face clearly. We walked like that for what felt like forever. Past the main road, past the old feed store, down toward the broken trailhead that led to the lake dock. I started to feel uneasy. Not scared exactly, but like something inside me was tightening. It wasn't just her behavior, it was the quiet. There were no birds, no wind, no distant traffic, just the crunch of our shoes on gravel and the soft shifting of leaves. The trees on either side of the road pressed in too close, their branches reaching over like claws. I was sweating, even though it was cold. I didn't understand why she was acting like that, but I kept following, because what else was I supposed to do? When we got to the footbridge, the narrow wooden one that crosses the ravine before you reach the dock, she finally stopped, dead center on the bridge, her back still to me. I slowed to a walk. Something in me was screaming not to get on that bridge. I don't know why, just instinct. I told her I needed to tie my shoe, that I'd be right behind her. She didn't move, didn't say anything. I crouched down anyway, trying to buy time. When I looked up, She had turned around. That face wasn't Leah's. Not completely. The skin was too tight. Her eyes were too wide, pupils huge, swallowing the whites. Her mouth stretched unnaturally far, pulled into a grin that looked painful. I wanted to call her name, but my throat locked. She held that grin for a few seconds, then leaned slightly to the side and dropped. Just stepped off the bridge like she was stepping off a curb. I screamed. I don't know if anyone heard me. I ran forward, yelling her name, scrambling to the edge of the bridge. But when I looked down into the ravine, there was no sound, no splash, no body. Just dark water far below, still and flat like a mirror. And then I heard her voice, not from below, from somewhere close. "Help me, please," she cried. Her voice was ragged, frantic. I spun around, looking for her. "I fell. Please help me." I leaned over the railing again, calling her name, begging her to answer. And again, "Help me, I'm hurt." But between the words, I heard something else. Something wrong. She was laughing. Not fully, just little bursts, choked giggles between the cries. It was too high, too fast. It wasn't Leah's laugh. It wasn't a human laugh. It sounded like someone pretending to laugh, like they'd only ever heard it from far away and were trying to mimic it. I froze. Every part of my body screamed to run. I backed away from the railing slowly, then turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the trail. I don't remember the trees. I don't remember the cold. Just the sound of that laughter behind me, fading, echoing through the trees like it was chasing me. I burst through the front door of my house, shaking. My dad was still asleep. I didn't wake him. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. At 5:10 a.m., I heard a voice outside. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late," it said cheerfully. I went to the window. Leah stood in the yard, grinning and waving. I didn't go out. I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and waited. She stood there for 10 more minutes, still smiling, not moving. Then she turned and walked away. I never saw her again. Not the real Leah. Her parents said she left early for a trip out of town. I don't know if that's true. I don't ask anymore. I still hear her sometimes. Or what wants me to think it's her. Always just before dawn, just outside my window. Always cheerful, always grinning. I never open the door. I never say a word. Because I know now, if something hears your plans in the dark, it can use them. It can become them. And once it does, you can't take them back. So don't talk about tomorrow when the stars are out. Don't whisper promises under the moon. And if someone you love shows up a little too early, don't follow them. Not until the sun is up. Not until you can see their eyes in the light.